Usually, when you look at a date on the calendar, it is strictly functional.
Right, like a deadline or something.
Exactly. It is a deadline, or maybe a birthday you really need to remember. Or honestly, just a Tuesday you have to get through to reach the weekend.
Yeah, just another box on the calendar.
But we have got a huge stack of research here for today's deep dive that suggests dates can be, well, something else entirely.
They can hold a lot more weight than we give them credit for.
They really can. And today we are zeroing in on February 19.
And we aren't just looking at one specific February 19, like from a single year.
Yeah.
We are looking at how that exact date echoes across nearly a full century.
Right. The sources frame this as a sort of, they call it a temporal cross-section.
Which is a great phrase.
It is. Because
Yeah.
if you slice history right at this specific date across different decades, you don't just get some random assortment of unrelated events.
At all.
Instead, you find this very specific, almost eerie narrative thread. One that connects, the icy tracks of the Winter Olympics all the way back to the jazz clubs of post-war Paris, and even the streets of South Central LA.
It sounds a bit like a conspiracy theory when you phrase it exactly like that.
I know it does.
But it is actually a really compelling study of sociological progression. The central thesis in the documents we are covering today is called the Unbroken Chain.
The Unbroken Chain of Black Excellence. I really love that title.
It fits perfectly with the source material. Because the argument here is that by pinning our analysis to this one date, to
Right.
February 19, we can literally see the evolution of Black liberation and culture in real time.
Step by step.
Exactly. We see how the strategy shifted. It goes from political petitioning to providing military proof to achieving cultural dominance, and then finally to breaking actual physical frontiers.
It is essentially a roadmap of tactics over the last 100 years. And the cast of characters the research highlights for this, it is just staggering.
So it really is.
We've got the intellectual giant W.E.B. Du Bois, the Motown legend, Smokey Robinson, the Tuskegee Airmen.
Incredible figures.
Yeah. And then director John Singleton and Olympian Vonetta Flowers.
It is a lineup that does not usually sit at the same table. I mean, you don't often see a bobsledder and a World War I era sociologist mentioned in the exact same sentence.
You really don't. So our mission for this deep dive is to figure out how all these pieces fit together. How is a peace conference in 1919 inextricably linked to a bobsled race in 2002? What is the actual mechanism connecting them?
To understand that, we have to start with the blueprint. We need to go back to the very first link in that chain.
All right, let's fire up the time machine then. We are going to February 19, 1919.
Paris, France.
Paris, France. Set the scene for us.
Well, the context here is absolutely everything. World War I has just ended.
The Great War.
Right. And the map of the world is literally being redrawn at the Paris Peace Conference. You have the great powers, Britain, France, the U.S., sitting in these plush rooms deciding who gets to run the world for the next 50 years.
And the assumption in those rooms, largely, is that the world will just continue to be run by empires.
Exclusively. The colonial model was still the default setting for global politics. But on February 19th, right in the middle of this massive imperial reshuffling, the first Pan-African Congress convenes.
At the Grand Hotel in Paris.
Exactly.
And this was W.E.B. Du Bois's brainchild, right? He was the main organizer.
Largely, yes. And we really need to pause on the logistics here because the sources emphasize just how difficult this was to pull off.
Oh, I can only imagine.
We're talking about 1919. Commercial air travel isn't really a thing yet. Communication is incredibly slow.
Telegraphs and letters.
Right. And crucially, governments were actively trying to stop this conference from happening.
Because the U.S. and British governments weren't exactly thrilled about Black intellectuals gathering to compare notes and talk about rights.
They were terrified of it. According to the research, they denied passports to some of the delegates. They even put diplomatic pressure on the French government to just cancel the whole thing.
Yeah.
So the fact that Du Bois managed to get 57 delegates from 15 different countries, talk Africa, the Caribbean, the U.S., and Europe, all into one room on February 19, it is honestly a miracle of organizing.
That is wild. So once they actually get into this room at the Grand Hotel, what were they asking for? Because I imagine demanding immediate total independence in 1919 would have been
A complete non-starter.
It would have been shut down immediately.
It would have been laughed out of the room. And this is exactly where the chain concept begins. Their strategy was incredibly nuanced. They passed resolutions demanding international oversight of colonies.
Okay.
They wanted the newly formed League of Nations to actually protect the rights of African people
Yeah.
rather than just handing them over to new colonial masters as spoils of war.
And the notes mention they demanded gradual steps toward home rule, which, I mean, that feels pretty polite, doesn't it?
To modern ears, yeah, it sounds conservative.
Right.
But you have to remember the context. In 1919, the idea that African colonies should ever govern themselves was considered radical.
Because the mindset was so entrenched.
Exactly. The European mindset was that colonization was a permanent benevolent state of affairs. So Du Bois and the Congress were introducing this concept of self-determination into the international legal framework for the first time.
So this wasn't about storming the gates with pitchforks. It was more about planting a legal virus in the system.
That is a great way to put it. This Congress formalized a strategy. Before this event, you had isolated anti-colonial grievances.
Like local protests.
Right. Someone in Kenya is upset about land rights, while someone in Alabama is upset about Jim Crow laws. But February 19th, 1919, is when those isolated grievances became a coordinated Pan-African movement.
It moved from saying, I'm suffering, to saying, we have a geopolitical position.
Precisely. This is the intellectual foundation of the chain. The sources make it clear that without the network built in that room, you don't get the widespread independence movements and civil rights campaigns that follow later in the century.
Because it turned the struggle into a global political question.
Exactly.
Okay, so 1919 gives us the theory, the intellectual argument for equality and self-governance. Now, I want to move the slider forward on our timeline. We are jumping to February 19th, 1942.
We are leaving the jazz clubs of Paris and heading to an airfield in Tuskegee, Alabama.
This is a massive shift in tone. We are going from a quiet conference room to the cockpit of a fighter plane. This is the day the U.S. Army Air Forces formally initiated the 99th Pursuit Squadron.
Which most people know better as the Tuskegee Airmen.
Right. Now, people know the name. We have seen the movies. We know the legacy. But I feel like the actual texture of this moment often gets lost in the history books.
It gets smoothed over a bit, yeah.
Because the sources make a major point about the double battle these guys were fighting. It wasn't just about fighting in World War II.
Right. You have to remember the intense skepticism they were up against at home.
Yeah.
This wasn't just the military saying, hey, let's train some pilots who happen to be black.
Because this is the Deep South in 1942.
Exactly. And the sources point out that there was a prevailing pseudoscientific belief within the military establishment at the time that black men simply lacked the focus, the coordination, and the courage to fly combat aircraft.
Wait, so they literally thought it was biologically impossible for them to be fighter pilots?
Effectively, yes.
Mm.
The research notes a famous 1925 Army War College report that explicitly stated black men were, quote, mental and moral cowards. And that was the official doctrine influencing military policy. So when the 99th Pursuit Squadron is activated on February 19, they aren't just gearing up to fight the Axis powers.
Right.
They are fighting a sociological experiment that was arguably designed to see if they would fail.
That puts a whole different level of pressure on the cockpit. I mean, the stakes are impossibly high.
Immense pressure.
Yeah.
Because if a white pilot crashed, it was just written off as pilot error. But if a black pilot crashed, it was seized upon as proof that the entire race couldn't handle aviation.
And their equipment wasn't exactly top tier initially, was it?
No, not at all. They had to cut their teeth on the older models. It wasn't until later that they got the P-51 Mustangs that became their signature aircraft.
The ones with the red tails.
Exactly.
Right.
But regardless of the equipment, the data speaks for itself. They flew hundreds of combat missions during the war, and they earned a stellar reputation as incredibly reliable bomber escorts.
Why specifically bomber escorts?
Because they stayed with the bombers. When other fighter groups would peel off to chase glory and try to shoot down German planes, leaving the bombers vulnerable, the Tuskegee Airmen stayed close. Their discipline was unmatched. They prioritized protecting the payload and the crew over getting individual kills.
Wow. So here's the link back to 1919. Du Bois and the Pan-African Congress used logic and diplomacy to argue for basic humanity. But the Tuskegee Airmen used undeniable competence.
Exactly. The sources call this the military anchor of the chain, because it's a lot harder to argue with a guy who just saved your life at 30,000 feet.
Yeah, that shuts the argument down pretty quickly.
It provided physical proof of citizenship and capability. You can ignore a political petition, but you cannot ignore a fighter squadron with that kind of success rate in a global war.
And this had a direct impact on policy, right? The sources highlight that it wasn't just a symbolic victory for morale.
Far from it. It made segregation in the military look incredibly inefficient and morally indefensible. The excellence displayed by the Tuskegee Airmen was a direct catalyst for President Truman issuing Executive Order 9981.
And that was in 1948.
Right, which officially desegregated the United States Armed Forces.
Okay, so the chain goes 1919 provides the political plan, and then 1942 provides the muscle.
And the undeniable proof of capability.
Right. But winning respect in a military hierarchy is one thing. Winning the hearts and minds of the general public, actually changing the broader culture, that is a totally different battlefield.
Which brings us nicely to the concept of soft power.
Yes. Let's look at February 19th, 1940. We are in Detroit, Michigan. 2 years before the airmen officially suit up, William Smokey Robinson Jr. is born.
The poet laureate of soul.
Now, everyone knows the falsetto. Everyone knows songs like Shop Around and The Tracks of My Tears.
Classic hits.
But our research heavily emphasizes that we shouldn't just look at Smokey as a singer or a frontman for the Miracles. We need to look at him as an executive.
That is a very crucial distinction in the source material. Smokey wasn't just the talent in the recording booth. He was actually the vice president of Motown Records.
He was in the boardroom.
Exactly. He sat in the meetings that actively determined how Black culture was going to be packaged, polished, and exported to white America.
So the whole Motown sound wasn't just some happy accident. It was highly engineered.
It was an assembly line, quite literally modeled after the Ford auto plants in Detroit, which is where Motown founder Berry Gordy used to work.
Yeah.
And Smokey was a key architect of what they called the crossover strategy.
Let's unpack that crossover strategy for a second, because crossover today just means your song happens to land on 2 different Spotify playlists.
Right, the definition has changed.
What did it mean back in the 1960s?
Well, in the 60s, the music charts were completely segregated.
Wow.
You had the pop charts, and then you had race records, which eventually became known as R&B.
Okay.
And the money, the major radio play, the cultural legitimacy, all of that was concentrated on the pop side.
The white side.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Smokey and Berry Gordy figured out how to take the raw emotional depth of the Black church and the blues, polish it with very tight pop song structures, and sell it to teenagers in the suburbs.
Teenagers whose parents would probably never let a Black person into their front door.
Precisely. It was a Trojan horse for culture.
The sources describe it as softening racial barriers through melody.
I love that phrasing.
Yeah.
Because when you have a white teenager in Iowa crying in their bedroom over a Smokey Robinson song, you have created a moment of genuine empathy that a political speech just can't achieve.
You've created a shared emotional language.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So while the airmen were using hard power to fight for the right to exist and serve, Motown was using soft power to fight for the right to be felt.
To be seen as complex, emotional human beings, and to do it with dignity. Because Smokey's lyrics weren't overtly political in the sense of protest songs, right?
Right. He wasn't writing, "We shall overcome."
But the sources argue his work was still radical because it asserted that Black love and Black heartbreak were universal human experiences.
It extends our unbroken chain by circulating that dignity globally. You couldn't stop the radio waves from crossing segregated city lines.
It just bypassed the gatekeepers entirely.
It really did. And by doing that, it prepared the cultural soil for these civil rights legislative victories that were happening simultaneously in the 1960s.
Okay, but there is a flip side to the Motown strategy. Motown was incredibly polished.
Very polished.
It was tailored suits, it was synchronized choreography, it was safe, it was meticulously designed not to scare anyone in the mainstream.
It was heavily focused on presentation. You could call it respectability politics set to music.
Well, our next link in the chain strips all that polish away entirely. We are jumping forward to February 19th, 1992, Los Angeles, California.
The cinematic anchor.
This is the exact day John Singleton becomes the first Black director to be nominated for the Academy Award for Best Director.
And he's only 24 years old at the time.
Still a kid, really.
Right.
It makes him one of the youngest nominees ever. And he's nominated for his film, Boys in the Hood.
A film that dropped like an absolute bomb on the American cultural consciousness.
It did. He was also nominated for Best Original Screenplay for it.
I rewatched the movie recently while prepping for this, and what really strikes me is the sound design.
Oh, the constant helicopters.
Yes, the constant hum of police helicopters flying overhead. It makes the neighborhood feel like an occupied war zone.
That was completely intentional on Singleton's part. And that contrast you mentioned earlier with Motown is vital to understand this link in the chain. Motown was all about crossover, making the content palatable and agreeable for the mainstream.
Right.
Singleton wasn't interested in making things palatable. He was interested in reality.
He forced the Academy, the absolute elite of the Hollywood establishment, to look directly at South Central LA. And not just to look at it, but to validate it as high art on a global stage. The sources point out that Singleton brought a realist Black perspective to a space that was previously dominated by fantasy or safe historical period pieces.
He put it right in their faces.
He showed the structural racism. He showed the realities of aggressive policing. He showed the deep vulnerability of Black youth. And he portrayed the gang violence not as some cheap entertainment, but as a devastating community tragedy.
So why does the research flag this specific nomination as a core link in the unbroken chain? Is it just because he broke a glass ceiling by getting nominated?
It is deeper than that. It is about the control of the narrative. Think about the progression we've seen. In 1919, Du Bois organizing to ask for basic rights.
Right.
In 1940, Smokey Robinson is singing to build empathy and acceptance. But by 1992, John Singleton is demanding witness.
Demanding witness.
Yes, he is saying you cannot look away from the structural reality of our daily lives.
It is an evolution of the collective voice. It goes from please listen to us to here's our reality, deal with it.
Exactly. And doing it at the highest possible level of institutional recognition. It proved that specific, intensely local Black stories had global resonance, and they didn't need to be watered down to reach a wide audience.
It really paved the way for the boom of diverse storytelling we see in film today.
Absolutely.
Which brings us to our final stop on the timeline. And honestly, this one feels the most distinct from all the others we've discussed. We've had global politics, we've had a world war, we've had pop music, and cinema. Now, we are going to the Olympics.
But importantly, we are not going to the Summer Olympics, where audiences are historically used to seeing Black excellence in events like sprinting or basketball.
No, we are going to the snow. Salt Lake City, Utah, February 19, 2002.
Enter Vonetta Flowers.
Now, the backstory here is just classic athlete resilience. She was a track and field star from Alabama.
Right.
She tried to make the Summer Games as a long jumper and a sprinter, but she failed to qualify.
She missed the cut. And for most elite athletes, that's the end of the road. You retire, you go back to coaching, or you just get a regular job.
But she decided to push a bobsled instead.
Which is a terrifying pivot. That is not a casual hobby to pick up.
Not at all.
It is pure physics and violence. You are sprinting on solid ice and then jumping into a heavy projectile that's moving at 80 miles per hour down a frozen chute.
But it paid off, because on February 19th, 2002, Vonetta Flowers wins gold in the two-woman bobsled event.
And the statistic attached to that win is completely historic.
She became the first Black athlete to win a gold medal at any Winter Games ever.
It is an incredible milestone.
It just seems wild that it took until 2002 for that to happen. That feels so incredibly recent.
It does feel recent, but it really highlights the massive barriers to entry. Winter sports are historically very expensive. They require specific cold weather geography. Because of that, they are historically very white spaces.
Yeah, I mean, you don't just stumble upon a bobsled track in the middle of Alabama. You have to actively seek that out and fund it.
Exactly.
So how does a bobsledder fit into the exact same chain as W.E.B. Du Bois and the Tuskegee Airmen? What's the connective tissue there?
It is all about the concept of the frontier. The sources call this final link expanding the geography of Black possibility.
I really love that phrase, the geography of possibility.
It fits perfectly when you think about it. The Tuskegee Airmen proved they belonged in the sky, a space that was fiercely denied to them.
Right.
Vonetta Flowers proved that Black athletes belonged on the ice.
Right.
It is the exact same energy. It is about entering a hostile or completely unfamiliar environment, mastering the immense technical requirements of that space, and then absolutely dominating it.
It is the refusal to be pigeonholed. It is looking at the establishment and saying, you think I'm supposed to be over here on the track? No, I am going to conquer the mountain instead.
And in doing so, she inspires an entire generation behind her. If you look at the diversity in winter sports today, while it isn't at total parity, yet it is miles ahead of where it was 2 decades ago.
And that shift really starts with Vonetta.
It does. She broke the psychological barrier that said, we simply don't do this.
So let's take a step back and look at the whole chain we've mapped out today. We start in 1919 with the intellectual framework.
The plan. The first Pan-African Congress demanding a place on the world stage.
Then we jump to 1942, providing the physical proof of capability in war with the Tuskegee Airmen.
That's the muscle, defending the nation to demand equality.
Then the 1940s and 60s, shifting to cultural seduction through music with Smokey Robinson and Motown.
The heart, building empathy through popular culture.
Then 1992, creating an uncompromising visual narrative with John Singleton's cinema.
The eyes, forcing the world to witness the unvarnished reality.
And finally, 2002, the breaking of physical frontiers with Vonetta Flowers on the ice.
And all of these massive shifts in strategy and triumph are anchored to the exact same date,
Oh.
February 19.
It really does challenge that idea of history just being a random series of events. When you lay it out like this, it feels much more like a relay race.
It is a relay race. And the
Okay.
most exciting part about a relay race is that it doesn't just end. The baton just keeps getting passed to the next runner. The work of organizing, of transforming culture, of fighting for recognition, it never actually stops. It just changes form to meet the needs of the era.
That is the big question, isn't it? If the chain truly is unbroken, where is the next link going to be forged?
That is exactly what the source material prompts us to ask at the end. We have conquered the diplomatic conference room, the fighter cockpit, the pop charts, the Hollywood screen, and the Olympic slopes. So what arena is left?
My mind goes immediately to something like tech, or maybe the hard sciences.
Exactly. Or space exploration, or cutting-edge bioengineering. The next February 19 moment might be a black scientist cracking cold fusion, or an engineer leading the very first commercial mission to Mars.
The actual frontiers are different, but the baseline requirement for excellence remains exactly the same.
The struggle for basic recognition shifts into the struggle for defining the future. And I think that is what makes this specific date so incredibly powerful. It's not just looking backward at what was achieved. It is a trajectory pointing straight forward.
Well, that is definitely something to chew on. Next time you look at the calendar and see February 19 coming up, just remember that it is a really heavy day. It is carrying a whole lot of history.
A temporal portal, just like you said at the beginning.
Exactly. Well, thanks for taking the jump with us today and breaking all this down.
Always a pleasure to be here.
And to you listening, thanks for diving deep with us. We will see you on the next one.